Demon Gambit, written by J.S. Morin, narrated by Michael Naramore. Jaraim's knife bit into ancient wood, following the chalky lines of the glyph. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and as he finished each cut, he gasped from having held his breath as he carved. It had taken him 3 days of surreptitious work, stealing hours when Fowlier was absent from their shared room. It was nearly finished. From the top post of the bunk beds, a crow squawked. Jaraim jumped, the knife dropping from his fingers. He aimed a glare at the creature, staring into the black pits of its eyes. "Shut up, Kalab! This is going to work. I just can't trust chalked warding circles anymore." Jaraim regarded himself from Kalab's perspective, through the mental bond shared between master and familiar. He looked haggard, pale, with dark circles beneath bloodshot eyes. Kalab was worried about his health. "I'll be fine. I'll sleep better once I settle this business. Just don't scare me like that when he gets here." Jaraim finished his carving, then wiped away the remnants of chalk with a rag. The circle was perfect and safe from smudges, sneezes, and other hazards of chalk-drawn circles. Waving away the cloud of dust he had added to an already dusty room, Jaraim dug through the desk drawers until he found a tallow candle. It was octagonal and violet, with glyphs stamped into each of its sides. As far as Jaraim knew, the glyphs were merely decorative, something to lure more coins from ignorant students. Jaraim was not one of those. He knew he was paying for the appearance of the arcane. Some things needed to appear as they ought to be, and not what they really were. Setting the candle at the center of the circle of glyphs, Jaraim steadied himself with a deep breath, and with a spark of elemental fire lit the wick. The tallow gave off a foul odor, some additive in the color burning sour and sulphurous. Jaraim waved away the smoke before beginning his chant. Dosic was an elder tongue, little used in modern magic except by those who dabbled in demonology. Jaraim had learned it in secret, just enough to practice the summoner's arts. The words were heavy, guttural, each carrying a taint of vulgarity. As the chant droned on, a pale blue glow formed in the glyphs, growing brighter with each repetition. Jaraim lost track of time, eyes focused on the candle flame. When the wick flared and the flame burst like a squeezed grape, his guest arrived. The creature was no taller than one of Jaraim's shoes, measured toe to heel. Its skin was the color of lava and glistened with oil. From its head sprouted a pair of tiny horns, and from its fingers even tinier claws, all ending in needle-like points. Its body was cherubic, with short, pudgy limbs and no defined muscle. Its name was Alcax, and it was a Telic, a lesser magma demon.
"Greetings, apprentice Jaraim,"
said Alcax in a reedy voice that lilted with sarcasm. The demon took in its surroundings, focused on the circle of glyphs carved into Jaraim's writing desk. Alcax gave a lazy kick in Jaraim's direction, and a flash of arcane energy repelled him at the circle's border.
"I'm moving up in the world. It's almost as if you're afraid of me. You haven't got a reason to be afraid of me, have you, apprentice Jaraim?"
Despite the barrier protecting him, hearing Alcax speak his name always caused a shiver in Jaraim's soul. Names held power, and the demon had wheedled Jaraim's given name from him when he was still too reckless and inexperienced to know better. Alcax had been the first demon he had ever summoned. He would also be the last, Jaraim had sworn. But not today. "I require your assistance," said Jaraim. He forced himself to meet the demon's gaze, looking into the black depths that were not so different from Kalab's now that he thought of it. Alcax smiled, showing off a mouthful of serrated fangs, lit from within by a furnace glow.
"Since when don't you? If you spent half the time studying that you spend pestering me, you'd be the top of your class on your own. I already gave you all the answers you'll need for your final test."
I've discovered that there will be secret questions at the end to see who among the students has studied best on their own. It will set the rankings in the event of multiple perfect scores. I stole the questions. I just need the answers from you." Alcax cackled.
I like you, human. Never satisfied. Never shy about what needs doing. Never afraid to bargain.
The demon's smile grew impossibly wide for its face. "What's it going to cost me?" Jaraim asked. He kept the fear from his voice. It made no difference what the demon asked. He would agree.
Well, since you already owe me a year of servitude, let's just add a month. 13 is a nice number.
Deal. My service still starts after I earn my medallion, said Jaraim. What that service would entail, Jaraim tried not to contemplate. Possession? Enslavement in the nether realm? His imagination had provided nightmares of every description. Jaraim relaxed as he read the questions from a scribbled list that he kept out of the demon's field of vision. They were a ruse, as was the added portion of the testing. The only answer he wanted was to the last question. How does one bind a narvish?
Oh, now that one ought to separate the censor sniffers from the scholars, said Alcax with a giggle. A nice boy like you shouldn't know such naughty words. I think I'll save you from yourself.
Jaraim knew better than to think the demon had his best interests in mind. It was valuable knowledge, and Alcax would not part with it readily. So then, our contract is void, and since this was an extension of our original deal and not a separate one, I am free of obligation to you. Jaraim sat back and crossed his arms, letting a smirk settle across his lips. Alcax lunged for him. Blue radiance flared at the tip of each of the demon's claws as Alcax tried to scratch his way through the barrier to no avail.
Trickster! You can't worm your way out of a bargain so easily. You belong to me.
The demon spoke 3 words. Jaraim felt sullied by hearing them, but forced himself to echo the chant.
There, our bargain is complete. I will return in 3 days' time to collect you, whether you summon me or not.
Jaraim barked a righteous word and forced Alcax back to his own world. The tiny magma demon vanished in a twist of sooty smoke, and the glow faded from the glyphs that bound him to the mortal world. An eerie quiet remained in the room, with Jaraim slumping back in his chair, exhausted. 3 days, and it would all be over. Kolob squawked. There were footsteps in the hall outside. Jaraim scrambled to clutter his desk, covering the circle of glyphs in books and notes, draping his traveling cloak over the chalk and knife. There was no time to put things away. By the time Fowlier entered, it looked as if Jaraim had been hard at study. "What's the matter?" Fowlier asked. Jaraim's roommate favored him with a look of concern. "You startled me, that's all. I've hardly slept, and I was lost in the pages. I didn't hear you sneak in." "I hardly sneaked," Fowlier replied. "You worry too much. You'll rank as top student, I just know it. Get some sleep." He gave Jaraim a friendly punch in the shoulder.
Got to be the best,
Jaraim muttered as he climbed into the top bunk. It's the only way I'll survive this mess I've made. The next evening, Jaraim cleared his desk and uncovered his summoning circle. A quick inspection revealed that all the glyphs were still intact. No surprise, but it was a sensible precaution when dealing with demons. Feeling at his belt, Jaraim drew out an iron dagger. It was new but poorly formed, an apprentice piece, not even cleaned of charcoal from the forge. For 2 coppers, it was a bargain, considering what Jaraim had in mind for it. Jaraim took a deep, steadying breath, but his gathering thoughts were scattered by a flapping of wings and a squawk as Kolob landed at the edge of the glyphs. Its black eyes stared up at Jaraim, and it spread its wings to block his view of the circle. Shoo! Get off there, said Jaraim. The circle held Alcax, and he's much stronger than Okada. You worry like those dusty old masters. The crow spread its wings and tried to block the summoning circle, but Jaraim brushed his familiar aside. If you want to help, keep quiet and don't distract me. Keeping the dagger in plain sight seemed indiscreet. The later Okada realized her peril, the better. Jaraim placed the weapon in the top drawer and removed a plain wooden bowl, aligning it in the center of the summoning circle. Biting his lip in concentration, he measured out 3 thimbles of vinegar and 6 of water. He added a pinch of natron and waited as the mixture frothed. The summoning chant was different than the one that summoned Alcax. Jaraim wanted Okada specifically, not just any Narvish. Though still foul, the words of Okada's summons were less harsh. They twisted the tongue into unfamiliar shapes, using sounds Jaraim's language had no use for. There was no counting the repetitions as the glyph's glow grew brighter and more insistent. Okada was resisting him. There could be no other reason for the summoning to take so long. Jaraim fought through the pain as the ancient syllables cramped his tongue. The mixture in the wooden bowl frothed anew and with more fervor. It boiled up and over the sides of the bowl, then steamed away as Okada plopped down atop the bowl, ripped unwillingly from her demonic abode. Okada's body was nearly spherical, with stubby limbs jutting from a bulbous mass that served as both torso and head. Jaraim could see the hints of organs through her translucent blue skin and fought to keep his dinner inside him. He had never grown accustomed to her appearance.
What a pleasant surprise,
Okada cooed, her voice sweet and innocent as a young girl's. That voice was the only reason Jaraim had come to think of the demon as female.
What service may I render, mighty one? Or have you finally decided to pay me?
You wouldn't have resisted coming if you believed that. Even through the protection of the summoning circle, Jaraim could feel the subtle insistence behind the demon's words. Okada could charm a eunuch, but not Jaraim. Not with the glyphs protecting him. Jaraim reached into his pocket and produced a pair of garnets the size of his thumbnail and rolled them across the desk. The gems came to rest just shy of the summoning circle, and Okada lurched for them reflexively. The demon squashed against the cylindrical barrier the circle provided, causing it to flare a pale blue.
Mine!
Okada shrieked. You can't have them, said Jaraim. Despite his disgust, he could not keep his eyes from the demon. Zanisha should have been mine by now, but she sees failure most nights and barely looks at me. Okada pulled away from the barrier and threw herself at it again, causing a brighter flare, but no better result. Growling, she turned her milky eyes toward Jaraim.
Manless wretch! She'd be swollen with your children by now if you'd listened to me.
No charms. That was the deal. You're supposed to be a master of manipulating emotions. You could have given better advice if you wanted to.
You have a soggy mind and a tongue like an axe handle,
said Okada.
Let me possess you, and I'll have her begging to serve you, charms or no charms. You lack the gall to carry out my plans yourself.
No. We're done.
Cheat! Liar! You cannot break our deal,
said Okada. She snarled, but the effect would have been more intimidating if the demon had teeth. The wet, mushy gums she bared provoked nausea, not fear. I'll make you a deal, said Jaraim. Tell me the binding chant for a kilut, and I'll give you your payment and call it even. A sly smile oozed onto Okada's face, her demeanor shifting in an instant.
So, looking to settle another deal without paying. Is that it?
What do you care? You'll have yours.
Why that girl doesn't love you, I can't imagine.
Okada cooed, her voice sending an unwelcome shiver of pleasure through Jaraim.
You're perfectly devious. Very well. The binding for the gems.
There was no risk to Okada. The binding for a kilut would have no effect on her, and she would be cheated of the gems if she refused. She recited the chant, and Jaraim echoed her until he had it memorized. Though Jaraim tried his best to keep it from showing, the words sent small tremors through his bones and teeth as he spoke them.
"Excellent,"
said Okada.
"Spoken like a true demon. Now, my payment, and I should like to be returned to my own realm."
Jaraim held the garnets in his palm and offered them to Okada, careful not to let his hand cross the barrier. Okada's fingers drew sparks from the protective circle as she clawed for them. "My father would kill me if he knew I'd borrowed them, let alone bartered them away." He snatched the gems away from the demon. Jaraim recited the chant that Alcax had given him. The Telic might drive a spiteful bargain, but he had never led Jaraim astray. Okada froze, a vile curse choked off mid-word with a squeak. The binding held her tighter than a giant's fist, as still as if she had been encased in stone. The Narvish twisted and spasmed, fighting the binding. Jaraim felt every moment as if it was his own hand holding her fast. Keeping the chant at a steady pace, he retrieved the dagger and aimed it for what looked as much like a heart as anything inside the demon. Jaraim put his other hand on the hilt and closed his eyes. Okada's struggles grew frantic. With a single thrust, Jaraim plunged the dagger into the immobile demon. The summoning circle did nothing to prevent his hand from crossing. The iron hissed as it slid through the demon's flesh, and Jaraim opened his eyes to see smoke pouring from the wound. In seconds, the demon sloughed away and dissipated, her remains vanishing into the nether regions from which Jaraim had summoned her. Only an odor lingered to prove the demon had ever been in the room. "See, Kalab," said Jaraim, favoring his familiar with a wan smile. "Nothing to it." He slumped back in his chair and let out a shuddering breath. The bird remained silent but flapped down to perch on the edge of a bucket by the door. Jaraim sighed. Kalab was right. The room would need a cleaning to be rid of the smell. One night later, Jaraim found himself back at his desk, all clean and smelling faintly of lye. There was no trace of Okada's odor, nor any evidence that she had been in the room at all. There was only slightly more evidence that Fowler had been there. Jaraim had fallen into an exhausted sleep before Fowler had come home. Jaraim had not awakened all night, his dreams plagued by the chant Okada had taught him, trapping him in his nightmares. He had awakened covered in sweat long after sunrise, and Fowler's blanket had been rumpled sometime in between. The two roommates had crossed paths in the dining hall just an hour ago, Fowler looking as if he had been made heir to the king, Jaraim feeling fortunate to keep his feet shuffling beneath him. What had made Fowler so chipper was also the reason behind his nightly absences. His nightly visit to the girls' wing to be with Zanisha. "I'll have my pick of postings once I'm named first initiate, and I'll find a better woman than Zanisha." The bucket sat beside Jaraim's desk, half filled with water. Jaraim had refilled it 3 times in washing up after Okada's demise, and refreshed it once more afterward. From beneath his mattress he removed a stoppered vial. Pulling the cork, he took a sniff, inhaling the scent of incense and holy oils. Jaraim poured the contents into the bucket. "Not even going to try this time?" Jaraim asked. Kalab stood on the window ledge, looking out over the city below. The familiar swiveled its head around and stared at Jaraim for a moment, then flew off. "Yogi doesn't much like you either." Jaraim rummaged in his chest of clothes until he found his laboratory gloves. While most of his wardrobe was finely made and new, the gloves were scarred, ugly things made purely for function. The leather was worn smooth along the palms and fingertips, and there was a layer of grime that resisted any attempts at cleaning. Jaraim tucked them into his belt before settling in to perform his summoning. He poured a small sack of coal ash into the summoning circle. 2 bone needles he stuck into the pile so that they stood upright, ends dipped in pitch. A flick of Jaraim's magic lit them. The spell to summon Yogi had always struck Jaraim as whimsical. There was a lilting sing-song to it, even if the words themselves were pestilent. The Kielut wasted no time in appearing. Upon completion of the second repetition, Yogi appeared, or rather Yogi's essence arrived, and inhabited the ingredients left on the table. The coal ash writhed and formed itself into bones. The flames detached themselves from the needles and rose into newly formed eye sockets of ash. Out of that amalgam emerged a skeletal gargoyle, bereft of flesh and sinew, with fire for eyes. Shadowy vapors wafted from its bones like steam from a stew. "Good to see you, master," said Yogi with a bow. The demon had no mouth nor even a lower jaw. Sound merely emanated from his vicinity. "How do you fare this evening?" "I have a problem, Yogi," said Jaraim. "Alcax. Time has come to be rid of him." Yogi needed no sugared words, no preamble. "Of course, Alcax was clever, a good tool for your studies, but he is no threat," said Yogi. "I have given you adequate tools to defend yourself from him, have I not?" "Perhaps," said Jaraim, "but I prefer overwhelming force. I want him unable to resist as I destroy him." "Wise. You want the chant to bind him, I assume." Jaraim smiled. Yogi was devious. He had taught Jaraim all he knew about handling demons. "Yes, Yogi, that's exactly what I want." Yogi gave him words that rang with power. There was something grand about the chant, as if it was meant for a wizard of great power, or so Jaraim imagined. At least there was no unpleasant effect merely from speaking them. "Your enunciation is excellent as always, master," said Yogi. The demon paced in the confines of the circle, his fiery eyes scanning the room. Jaraim pulled out his gloves and put them on slowly. "Ah, I see." "Sorry, Yogi. I'm retiring from demonology. There's no future in it, at least none that I want a part of. I'm getting out while I still have my soul." "But you don't," said Yogi. "That soul inside you belongs to me. That was our deal." "I'm breaking it. I'm sure one of your kind can understand." "All too well." Yogi's voice sounded wistful. Jaraim began the binding chant, and Yogi stiffened. Unlike Okada, he offered no resistance. When Jaraim picked him up, Yogi's wings crumbled against his body like gossamer. The demon weighed next to nothing, even less than the sack of ash that had spawned him. "I have so much more I can teach you," Yogi said, his disembodied voice unencumbered by the binding. "And it's not as if you will be free of our bargain if you destroy me. The debt will merely pass on to another." Jaraim wanted to question him, to object, to deny the claim, but there was no way without ceasing the binding chant. He was committed. There was no turning back. Jaraim took Yogi and dunked him in the bucket of holy water. Just before he hit the water, Yogi gave up his passive mien. The Kielut thrashed and flailed in spite of the binding spell. Without the binding, Jaraim would have had no hope of containing him. The water bubbled and steamed. The bucket shook. Then all went quiet. The water in the bucket was gray with ash. It was all there was of a yogi in this world when Jaraim thought about it. Even then he would dump the bucket in the forest far from the school's well. It never hurt to be cautious. A squawk at the window startled Jaraim, causing him to drop the bucket just as he picked it up. The water sloshed up the sides, but did not spill over. "Back, huh? After making me face Yogi alone?" Kalab extended his wings halfway and ducked his head. The familiar hobbled along the window ledge, stiff-legged. Jaraim laughed. It was a fair approximation of Yogi's pacing. You're right. I guess he does look a little like a dead bird. Did. There's no more Yogi to worry about. It's just Alcax left now. One night later, Jaraim felt the excitement welling within him. This is it, Kolob. Last demon I ever summon. The crow cocked its head and stared at Jaraim. No, I mean it. They've been nothing but trouble. I barely sleep anymore. I lost any chance I might have had with Zanisha. Fowlier probably hates me for besting him in class. Even cheating, I've barely come out ahead. What good will that do me out on my own? First initiate with an education full of holes. Kolob nodded, bobbing his whole body in the motion, and hopped from the desk, gliding down to alight on the edge of the dry, empty bucket. There was no trace of a yogi left within. Jaraim went through the arrangements for summoning Alcax once more. He was faced with the prospect of the demon finding his own way into the world if Jaraim did not summon him first. It was difficult for demons to find passage to the mortal realm, but for the collection of a debt such as Jaraim's, Alcax would find a way. The summoning circle was pristine, the glyphs each intact. Removing evidence of them from the desk surface would be a task for another day. For now, deep, clean cuts were preferable. Jaraim lit the candle and began his chant, a giddy excitement rising inside him. It's almost over. Alcax appeared as the candle flame popped.
My, I hadn't expected you to have the heart to call me to the mortal realm. Eager to begin your service?
A blackened tongue ran across the demon's lips. Jaraim reached inside his tunic and pulled out his medallion. The silver was freshly polished. The diamond at its center sparkled, marking his rank. They named me first initiate just this morning, said Jaraim. You kept your end of the bargain.
I must admit, I had picked you for a whiner and a wheedler. A sniveler, perhaps. I might even see fit to take it easy on you during your indentureship.
Alcax giggled hysterically. Have your fun at my expense once I'm yours, Jaraim scolded him. First, a toast. He reached to the floor beside his chair outside the demon's sight and lifted a goblet. To bargaining with forces you don't understand. The giggling stopped instantly.
What's in that?
Alcax hunkered down and backed away from Jaraim until the barrier of the summoning circle stopped him. Unfermented wine. Your favorite. Jaraim swirled the goblet under his nose and breathed deeply. There was no acidic tang, just the heavy scent of grape.
Stupid human! You can't trick me into drinking that,
said Alcax with a sneer. Jaraim smirked. Who said anything about tricking you? I'm going to force it down your throat. You weakling demons should know better than to bargain with humans.
I'd like to see you,
Alcax said, but got no farther. Jaraim began his chant, and the demon's mouth froze mid-sentence. Pulling on his laboratory gloves and still chanting, Jaraim reached the goblet toward the immobile demon. The bulbous, pudgy magma demon flared red-hot, the only act it could manage while held in thrall. Jaraim had only to worry about singeing his gloves. Just as he was about to grab the demon by the neck to tilt its head back, Alcax stepped back. With one foot of his claw, the demon scratched one of Jaraim's glyphs, and the azure glow of the summoning circle winked out.
I don't think I'll be drinking any of that virgin wine, Jaraim Tenhold, son of Machias Tenhold of Norvern Keep. Your magic can't bind me.
He learned my name. How? Was all Jaraim could manage to utter.
Your friend Fowlier sold it to me in return for a binding charm for some sorceress whelp he fancied, said Alcax.
With a brief flash, a pair of iron manacles appeared in the demon's hands, barbed and covered in green burning glyphs.
Time to see your new home.
No, Jaraim backed away, unable to take his eyes from the demon. Alcax lunged for him. Jaraim threw up his hands in a feeble attempt to fend off the tiny demon. Despite their difference in size, he held no illusion that he could fight the creature with his bare hands. He closed his eyes. Jaraim heard a squawk and a furious rustle of feathers, followed by a string of curses in a demonic tongue he was thankful not to comprehend. Opening his eyes, he saw that Kalab had interposed himself between Jaraim and Alcax, and was struggling to fend off the demon. "Kalab, no!" Jaraim worked a quick spell, and the crow grew to the size of a hunting dog. Still, it would never be able to harm the inhuman creature. He fended Alcax away with beak and talons, but it was only a matter of time. Kalab turned toward Jaraim and squawked again. The message was clear. "Run while I hold him off." "I'm sorry!" Jaraim shouted as he fled for the door. Jaraim skidded on slippered feet as he bolted into the hallway. Behind him, he heard a terrible shriek that could only have come from a giant crow. He put his head down and ran. There was only one hope. The masters did not sleep in the dormitories, and none of the other students would be of any help. Below, in the basement of the school, there was a door. It was older than the building itself. The school had been built over it. The elder students were told of it, warned that it was only for use in dire emergencies. No one knew where it went, but if an experiment went badly enough, it was a sure escape. Jaraim tore through the halls, bounded down stairways 3 steps at a time. He could hear the scrabbling claws as Alcax pursued. He did not spare the breath to scream or cry. Most of his fellow students would wake with no knowledge of what had befallen Jaraim, except Fowlier. He would know. Would he cover his tracks or expose Jaraim as a summoner who had met his end by his own vile art? Jaraim reached the basement level with the sound of Alcax's pursuit fading behind him. His longer legs and panic-stricken energy gave him an edge in speed over the chubby demon, but that only brought him a moment's lead. It ought to have been enough. When Jaraim rounded the final turn, he stopped short. "I thought you might be down here tonight," said Fowlier, leaning casually against the ancient door. You, Jaraim said, short of breath and short of words as well. "You have 3 options," said Fowlier. "If you want, I'll let you right through this door. You can send yourself off to who knows whether that's any better than where Alcax wants to take you or not. Or you can apologize for cheating me out of First Initiate, confess, and renounce your claim before the whole assembly. I can use the binding chant on Alcax if you tell it to me." "The 3rd option?" Jaraim asked. 3rd options left lingering were usually the ones the speaker meant you to take. "We fight one another right here, and even if you win, that demon will drag you off in servitude." Jaraim did not even bother with a response to that option. Alcax was growing closer by the second. He told Fowlier the chant. Hearing the profane words spoken aloud by Fowlier made Jaraim's teeth ache. He backed away, cringing. Alcax fared far worse. The pudgy little demon squealed, his mouth contorted to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. His steps faltered, and Alcax fell to his hands and feet, his belly too round for his knees to touch the floor. Fowlier continued the chant, and Jaraim watched in admiration as the rightful First Initiate took control of the demon's body. Alcax drew slowly to his feet, but not of his own volition. He was a puppet, fighting his strings. The demon's movements slowed, his body twitching and spasming under the strain of fighting the binding chant. Sweat beaded on Fowlier's face. The outstretched hand that pantomimed a crushing grip on Alcax began to quiver with fatigue. He took a quick glance over his shoulder at the shimmering light from the door. Jaraim smirked at the realization that Fowlier was considering jumping through if he lost control. "Help me, or he'll have us both!" Fowlier instantly resumed his chant. Even in that brief interruption, Alcax had advanced a step and set his claws grasping at the air toward his captor. The demon's attention had diverted away from Jaraim entirely. Jaraim circled around, careful to keep out of the demon's reach should Failure falter. Though he favored his roommate with a malicious grin, he offered his reassurance. "Keep him under control. We'll get him from both sides. Can't say I'm not enjoying seeing you sweat, though." "Hurry!" Jaraim took a long breath and steadied his nerves. Alcax was aligned directly between the two student wizards, hanging mid-leap after his latest brief advance toward Failure as the chant was interrupted. The two treacherous creatures were devoting all their power toward each other's destruction, instead of Jaraim's for once. Jaraim began a chant of his own, using syllables from the Elementalist's Codex and keeping his voice low. Commanding the four aspects of nature had never been his strongest talent, but he knew enough. Yogi had tutored him on all manner of practical magic. He might not have been Failure's equal in history or magical theory, but if Failure were as well versed in demonology as Jaraim, he wouldn't have needed aid to destroy a bound demon. As Jaraim finished his spell, a gale blew through the basement corridor, more focused and determined than any mundane wind. It caught both traitors in its grasp and hurtled them toward the open door. Failure, fool that he was, continued the chant as a scream, even as he left first his feet, then the world. Alcax broke free of the binding almost instantly, but it was too late for the demon. Though he managed to twist in midair and spit a vile curse, he was swept through to who knows where, just as Failure had been. With a flourish of his fingers, Jaraim diverted the last of his gust to catch the door and blow it shut. It slammed with a booming finality. His heart pounded in his chest, and a giddy laugh escaped him. Slumping against the wall, he found his limbs trembling. Soon there would be questions, demands for answers, a formal inquiry. He didn't have much time to compose himself, but for the moment, he savored the taste of freedom. The following evening, Jaraim sat alone in his room, his desk gone. The masters let Jaraim have Failure's, since his unfortunate roommate would no longer require it. There was an emptiness deeper than just the dust-free spot where the desk had been. The masters had ordered it carted away and burned. Jaraim had lost 2 friends last night, one true and one false. The only tears he shed were for brave, loyal Kolob. In a contemplative mood, Jaraim wandered down to the basement level. Along the way, he spotted Zanisha in the halls. She saw Jaraim and sought him out.
"Tell me it isn't true,"
she said, sniffing. Her eyes were red and swollen. Jaraim hung his head. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid it is. It's not your fault. If I had known, I'd have stopped him. Please believe me, I'd never condone using love charms." With no one to gainsay him, Jaraim could spread whatever tales he liked about Failure. For all he knew, Failure had used the charm that Alcax bartered for his name. Zanisha broke down crying and hurried away. Much as he wished to comfort her, Jaraim knew she did not need him right then. Someday, perhaps, he could be that kind of comfort to her. Not today. When Jaraim reached the door in the basement level, he found it open. Master Morin stood before it, lost in thought as he gazed into the iridescent light that poured from it. "Where do you think he ended up?" Jaraim asked. Master Morin sighed. "One of the great mysteries. Alas, First Initiate, for all that you may ever learn, you will never find the answers to every question." Jaraim hid his smirk from Master Morin. Poor Failure. He should have known better than to trifle with forces he didn't understand. Thanks for listening to this short story. For more J.S. Morin audiobooks, please visit jsmorin.com/audio.